happens Friday.
Oh, right. All right, I'm going to start with the sponsorships.
Okay.
Hopefully that will give Erwin and Ted a chance to get on, okay?
Okay.
And then we'll get rolling. Okay. Year of Learning, Dr. Paul Konigsberg, in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Konigsberg, Shimon Ruvain ben Levish, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nisan Hara, Nisan ben Fardosa. Continuing a Year of Learning by Paul and Bob Bromberg, in memory of their dear friend, Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malka Mann, in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Peres, Saratova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, Cheryl Schur, children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva. A Month of Learning by Lynn Rappaport, in memory of her husband, Avram ben Siona Kohen. A Week of Learning by Marcia and Gary Schrager, in memory of her mother, Miriam Yenta Bas Baruch. That is it for today. And Shema's having Aliyah, Craig Rafia, Valdi Yashir, Rishama Talia, and the Chol B'nai Israel, a good gebenched Yar. And we welcome Harvey.
Hi, Harvey. Baruch Rofei Cholim. How you feeling? I don't think he's
muted.
He's muted? Oh.
Yeah, but it's
I'll mute myself.
Oh,
very good to see you back, Harvey.
Yeah.
How are you feeling, Harvey?
Much better. You know, still a little problems, but we'll handle those.
Are you home?
Yeah, now I'm home.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Stay
very
there, will
rarely
you?
have fans in the hospital.
Oh, really? No?
No? Okay. All right. Very good. Everyone's on. Harvey's on. We'll get started.
Where are we up? Just curious. Let's see.
Hopefully Ted will get on by phone. That's what he was doing the end of last week. He was in Orlando.
Right.
I want to do just a very quick review to help us get into the end of this last material, which was quite complicated. And if you didn't understand it, you're not the only one. Okay? Astronomic and seasons and things like that. What we want to focus on, however, briefly, is if you go back to Nun Vav Amud Beis, okay, actually go to 56B1 if you're using Art Scroll, okay? And you see there's a discussion there's the Breita that's brought on the very top of the Amud, okay? Basically, the Breita is saying one who squares a circular city to establish its legal parameter. In other words, you make it like a square tablet, right? And then the Breita went on. He then returns and squares the Tchum areas of the city, making them like a square tablet. Going on, now when measuring the Tchum, one should not measure two, etc., etc., etc. So it's a long Breita and finishes up with the question of the corners and the diagonal and things like that. So there's a lot of discussion, the rest of that Amud, on this Breita. How much it is, what's the difference with the diagonals, things like that. So when we get to the bottom of Nun Vav Amud Beis on 56B3, okay, you can see the Gemara there is still trying to give alternative explanations to the Braita. Okay? And that's where we're going to pick up 3 lines from the bottom on 56b3 Nun Vav Amud Beis, okay, with Abaye's alternative explanation. Okay? So the very 3 lines up from the bottom, Abaye Emer Mishkachet La Nami. Okay, namely, B'mata Dahavya Alpha Ba'alpha Tchumim Kama Hovu. Okay, so Abaye's explanation is if you find the Braita, okay, and the city is 1,000 by 1,000 amos. Okay, Tchumim Kama Havu Tamnaya. Okay, so he says, what's the size of the 4 tchum areas? It's 8 million square amos. Okay, that's his point. B'mata adahava alpha ba'alpha tchumim kama havu tamnaya. 8, okay, million. Right? And the Gemara responds, kranot kama havu. And what about the corners? How large are the corners? All right, and he answers, Shitzar, 16 million square amos. And now we go back over to where we're supposed to be today, on Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. Okay. Dal Arba the Tchumin Ba'arba de Kranot. Subtracting then 4,000 or 4 million really from the Tchum area, and 4 million also from the corners, he says. Kama havu, how much is it going to be then? Okay, well, 4 and 4 is 8. You had 16. We know that much arithmetic, right? Tilta havu. Tamnaya, it's 8 million, but the Gemara questions that, right? Tilta havu, okay? But why don't we say it's supposed to be 1/3 of the area? So the discussion revolving around this Braita is, are you talking about 1/3 less or 1/4 less? So the Gemara then responds, Misvarat b'rabua ka'amar? Are you talking really that we're dealing with a square, a rectangle? Be'igula ka'amar. We're talking really about a round city, okay, that was simply squared off like a square tablet, okay, because that was easier to determine. Kama meruba yoter al ha'igul. So we ask, how much more is this circle greater than the rectangle or the square? Ribuya, it's 1/4 more. So Gemara says, dal rabia, deduct 1/4, pashula shita. Okay, if you subtract the 4th, we're back down now to 6 million square amos. Okay, right? Vashita may 1/24th mikaf dalid rabia, and the 6th is 1/24th of that whole area. Okay, now, given this suggestion by Abaye, okay, we now come to another attempt to explain the Braita. Okay, the fact that the Braita, okay, that you have so many multiple explanations tells you that already there's a problem with understanding the Braita. Ravina Amar. So Ravina suggests, Amar Mai Ravia. What do we mean, says Ravina, when we say 1/4? Okay. Ravia de Tchumim. We're talking 1/4 of the Tchum areas. So if we look at on 57A1, the diagram in the notes on the right-hand column, okay, which I'm going to call diagram number 3 there, okay? Just look at the inside, you can see the area, there's the city, but if it's, okay, if it was rounded, it was made into a square, okay? And there's the areas opposite it. So you not including those corner areas, right? That's what Ravina is saying, okay? Now what happens? All right. So you're only going to count 1/4 of the tchum area. Amar le Ravina le Rav. So what happens? Rav Ashi doesn't agree. Rav Ashi Amar my Ravia. What do we mean by 1/4? Ravia de Kranot. We're talking about 1/4 of the corners. Okay? So what Rav Ashi wants us to do is look at a different diagram. Okay, that's the one on 57A1 connected with note number 7. Okay, that we are including the corners, but not the other areas directly touching the city. And if we take 1/4 off each of those areas, that's what Rav Ashi suggests is the 1/4. Okay, so what happens? Rav Ashi Amar, my Ravia, we said, Ravia de Kranot, 1/4 of the corners. So Ravina challenges him. Amar le Ravina le Rav Ashi. V'hasaviv kativ. But around it, our Braita said, right? So doesn't that refer to that area, right? Directly around the city. Isn't that what it's referring to, says Ravina? My saviv. Okay, so what do we mean when we say around? Rav Ashi's going to answer, saviv de kranot, around the corners. De ilo temahachi, because if you don't say it that way, okay, gabe ola, when we're taking another example, okay, namely the example of a olah, a burnt offering, where there dichtiv, it's written in the text of the Torah, v'zarku b'nei ha'ron, understanding, et hadam al hamizbeach saviv, where it says that the Kohanim sprinkled the blood on the altar around. What does it mean around? Hachanami saviv mamash. Do we really think it meant all around the altar? Elamai saviv, saviv de kranot. But rather it was talking about around the corners. In other words, by sprinkling the blood on a corner, you actually got 2 sides of the mizbeach at the same time. So you could have done 4 sprinklings, but you would have covered all the sides of the mizbeach, okay, easily. Hachanami saviv mamash, elamai saviv. You may have thought it was surrounded itself. Saviv, saviv de kranot, hachanami. Okay, so here too, it's also talking about that. So my saviv, saviv de kranot. So that was Rav Ashi's attempt to explain, okay, the Braita. Now, Rav Ashi is going to get challenged again, however, by 2 sages, both from Mechuzah. Okay? Amar le Rav Chavivi Mechuzna'a, right? The Rav Ashi. So he challenges Rav Ashi's explanation. Vaha'ika Morsha de Karnata. Okay? But don't we have there certain protrusions out of the corners of the city? Okay? So if we're looking at that diagram from 57A1, note 7, okay? Each corner of the city could have had, let's say, a turret, okay? Right? And therefore, those would have stuck out from the walls of the city. So that's part of his argument. Don't you have to include those as well in your measurements? B'mata igula. He says, even when it's a round city. Okay? That's Rav Ashi's answer. We're talking about a round city, not a squared off city. So it's not going to necessarily have turrets in the corners. Okay, we simply, I'll use the word for the moment, pretend that we square it off. Okay, Vaha Rivuha. But he says, but Rav Chavivi says again, but we're saying it's as if it's squared off. Okay, Amor. So therefore I would say as follows, the Amrinen Chazinin Keman Mirba, that we have to perceive it as if it's a kind of square. Revua Vadai. Okay, so Rav Ashi is going to come back, okay, and answer him, okay? Is it really square? Mimer Ba'ana? Do we really make it into a square? No, we're only, like I said, pretending. We're only using that as a model for the round city to make it easier to distinguish how to lay out the grounds for the Tchumim. Now, another sage from Mechoza, again, is going to challenge Rav Ashi. Amar le Rav Chanilai Mechuzna'a, the Rav Ashi. And he challenges him this way. Michte, since Kama Meruba Yater al Ha'igul, how much more is the, let's call it rectangle or the square, put around a circle? How much greater is it? Okay. Right, and if you look on 57A2, the note 13 at the diagram, we can see there, okay, that there is certainly putting a square around the round city. Okay, there's areas, right, 4 areas that are not included in the city. So that those total 4, let's call them corners, would equal to be 1/4 of the space. And that's what he says to him. Ravia, it's a quarter. Hani, tamne mea. Okay, so this quarter, he says, is going to add up to 800, right? Shit mea vishitin ushiva nache tilta have. Actually, it's not 800. He says, instead, it's going to be 666 2/3 amos. That's what we have. Amarle, okay? So again, Rav Ashi responds, Hani mili, be'igula, here we're talking about a round city, migo ravua, that's within this area of a square. Aval ba'al kasona, but if we're talking about the diagonal, okay, from the center of the city going out to the corner of that square, be'enet fei, okay, then he's saying what happens in that case, right? We would wind up, okay, to have more space, okay? Right? That would be the case, right? We would need more. The amar mar, because as the master says, mar kol amta berivua, namely comparing measurements. Any amar, when we talk about a in a square, amta utre chumshe ba'al kasona, is going to be equivalent to basically a different measurement on the diagonal, namely an amma and 2/5 on the diagonal. Okay? And that's where we end that particular discussion. Okay? So we saw, okay, that the last couple of dapim gave us methodology by which to determine, okay, different kinds of towns or cities. One earlier was a town that was in a square. One was a town in a circle. Another time we saw a town that was shaped, structured along a bow, okay? Right? Or, shape. Okay? So our new Mishnah now is going to raise the interesting question. Our new Mishnah is going to tell us, okay, let's assume that we have two cities, two villages, in fairly close proximity one to another. How close do they have to be considered a single unit? Okay? Because this is important, since if we live in, let's say, town A, and town B is fairly close by, okay, could town B be included in my Tchum Shabbos of town A? Or if they're all considered one community, then even though I live in town A, I can walk through whatever distance there is between A and B, go into B, and my Tchum then starts on the far side of town B. Okay? So let's look at our Mishnah and then our Gemara. Okay? Matnitin says our Mishnah, Notnin Karpaf Le'ir Divrei Rabbi Meir. We give an empty lot, an empty area. How much? We're going to see that it's going to be basically 70 2/3 amos. Okay? Right? For a town, for a village. Right? Says Rabbi Meir. V'chachamim omrim, but the sages say, Lo amru karpaf, ela bein shtei ayarot. According to the sages, we only give this karpaf when it's between two towns, two cities. Im yesh lazo shivim ama v'shirayim. If this one has 70 amas and a little bit more, that's our 2/3, right? Ulazo shivim ama v'shirayim. And to this one, also there's 70 and a little more, 2/3. Osek karpaf et shnehen liot echad. We make a karpaf for the two of them to make them one. Now, before we continue, okay, the language of this later piece of rabbis is a bit problematic, right? Because it says, on the one hand, we make for this one, we make for this one, karpaf, karpaf. Does that mean that we make two karpafs for the two towns, to the two cities? Or do we only make one? Okay, it seems problematic. If we say we only make one, how is that going to be any different, okay, from what Rabbi Meir said? Because he started off our Mishnah by saying we make a karpaf for the city. Okay, so let's go on now in our Mishnah. V'chein shlosha kfarim, and likewise 3 villages, hameshulashim, that are 3 grouped as a 3, but we don't know at the moment whether they are 3 grouped in a row or say 3 grouped in what we might call a triangle. Im yesh bein shnayim chitzonim me'ah v'arba'im v'echat u'shlosh, if between the 2 of the cities, the outer 2, we have an area, okay, That's 141 and a third amos, right? What happens? Asa emtsa'i et shloshan, and we could fit the third village in that space between the two, right? Lihiot echad. Then they would all be considered one large city. So the Gemara asks, Mina hani mili, on what basis do we say this? Can we find a basis in Torah? Amar Rava, says Rava, the Amar Kra. We have a pasuk that says we measure mikir ha'ir v'chutza, from the wall of the city and outward. Okay? Now, if you simply said, the pasuk could have said mikir ha'ir, from the wall of the city. But the fact that the pasuk says and outward seems to imply some additional space beyond the walls of the city. Amra Torah, says the Torah, okay, ten chutza, namely that you have to go beyond. Okay, v'achar kach madod, and afterwards then one measures. Okay, so that seems to be the implication derived by Rava from the pasuk. And since it said that on a Levitical city, we're going to use that as the model for other cities. So that would seem to tell us that if the city would first have an open space of about 70 plus amos, and then from there, not from the wall, you would start measuring the Tchum Shabbat for the 2,000 Dama. V'chachamim omrim lo omru v'chuli. But now we get to the next part of our Mishnah, where the sages said that the rule of the Karpaf is only as a separation between two cities. Itmar. And it was said, okay, about this, Rav Huna Amar notnim Karpaf lezo v'Karpaf lezo. Rav Huna says, our Mishnah specifically says that we give a lot to this one and a lot to this one, which would seem to imply, right, two lots for the two cities. Chia bar Rav Amar, and Chia bar Rav disagrees with Rav Huna and says, Karpaf echad l'shtehen, that there's only one empty lot between the two cities. And now a Mishnah, okay, as teaches as follows. V'chachamim omrim, and the sages say, lo amru karpaf ela bein shtei ayarot, that we only referred to the establishment of a karpaf as a separation between two cities. Tiyufta de Rav Huna. Doesn't this seem to be a proof text against Rav Huna? Amar lecha Rav Huna. Rav Huna could come back and answer us. My karpaf. What do we mean when we say karpaf? Torat karpaf. We're talking about the principle of the law of a karpaf. Ule'olam karpaf lezo ukarpaf lezo. And therefore we determine, like our Mishnah said, a lot to this one and a lot to this one. Hachanami mistabra. And this seems logical, midikatani seifa, from the way it's phrased at the end of our Mishnah. Im yesh lazo shivim ama v'shirayim. If this one has 70 ama plus, a little more, ulazo shivim ama v'shirayim, and this one's 70 ama and a little more, osek karpaf l'shtehen, that you make a karpaf for both of them, liot echad, so the two of them can become one. Shma mina. And this seems that we learn from this. Okay? Telling us, therefore, that Rav Huna's explanation that there should be two karpafs, one for each city. Therefore, the Gemara says, Lema tehave tiyufta dechia ba'arav. So shall we say then that this is a proof text against Chia Ba'arav? Amar lecha Chia Ba'arav. However, Chia Ba'arav is going to come back and now give us an answer as we turn to the top of Nun Zayin Amud Beis. Okay? Ha-mani, according to whom is this part of the Mishnah? Rabbi Meir he. This is according to Rabbi Meir, who, remember, at the beginning of our Mishnah, specifically said, Notnin karpaf le'ir, divrei Rabbi Meir. Okay? However, the problem is as follows, says the Gemara. I Rabbi Meir, if you're saying that end of the Mishnah, if Chia Bar, right, is saying that follows Rabbi Meir, ha Tani le Resha. Here he already taught us that at the very beginning of the Mishnah. So why did he have to say it twice then? Why say it once at the beginning of the Mishnah? So you're saying Techiyah. Okay, and why derive it then again towards the end of the Mishnah? Okay. So we have to see, can we answer that? Notnin karpaf le'ir, divrei Rabbi Meir. That's what he clearly said at the beginning of the Mishnah. So the Gemara says it's shricha. Maybe it was necessary both cases to say it at the beginning of the Mishnah and then later on. Okay? And this is the Gemara's answer. De'ime hahi, if we had only said it from the beginning of the Mishnah, right? Hava amina, chad lechada, v'chad letarte. I would have thought that Rabbi Meir's intent was one karpaf for one city, one karpaf for two cities. Kamash malan comes to teach us that that's not the case. Dilatard, it comes to teach us that would be, right? That would be the case. Okay. Dilitarte tre yahavin laho. Okay. Right? That therefore we could say that for the two of them, okay, we would derive that you have to be two places, two karpafs for the two cities. Ve'iyashme'in hacha. And had we learned it, okay, only in the second example, the later part of the Mishnah, okay, where two karpafs combine, okay, for two cities in only one karpaf, mishum de dechika tashmishtaihu. That makes it too crowded for use. Okay, aval hatam, but there, delo dechika tashmishtaihu, where it's the one city and it's not too crowded, emelo, I would say no, you don't need two karpafs, tzricha, and therefore that's why I needed the second phrase. However, the Gemara is going to pick up and give us another explanation, okay? Following, Tnan, but elsewhere we have another Mishnah that teaches, B'chein shlosha kfarim hameshulashim. And likewise, when we have three villages that are grouped in a three, grouped together as three. Im yesh bein shnayim hachitzonim me'a va'arba'in ve'achat ama ushlish. And this way this Mishnah seems to be phrased makes us think that the three villages are in a row. Okay? And if they're in a row, okay, we're talking about the difference now between the two outer ones. If between the two outer ones we have an area of 141 and a third, okay? Ose emtsa'i et shloshtan liyot echad. Then that, okay, so long, if we have less than 141 and a third amos, okay, and that third village can fit in, then we consider all three of them like a single unit. Ta'ama de'ika emtsa'i. Why? Because then we have that one in the middle. Ha'leka emtsa'i lo. But if we don't have one in the middle, no. Okay? Tiyufta, the Rav Huna. Then this would again be a proof text against Rav Huna, okay, saying that you have a karpaf for each location. Amar lach Rav Huna, ha'itma'ala. So Rav Huna responds, but wasn't it said about this as follows? Amar Rabba, Amar Rav Idi, Amar Rabbi Chanina. Says that Rabba says in the name of Rav Idi, in the name of Rabbi Chanina, Lo meshulashin mamash. No, they weren't three in a row. Elaroin kol she'ilu matil emtsa'i beinehen. But we see, this is rather, that there weren't three in a row, but we view it as the following. That let's say they were in a triangular shape, okay? Where you had the, I'm going to suggest, the two on the base and the one that's in the middle on the top, okay, of the triangle. If that were to be the case, and you were to theoretically move that one from the top down between the middle, okay, would therefore you have a situation that they could all be considered a single unit? Okay. Elaroin kol she'ilu matil emtsa'i b'neihen v'yu meshulashin ve'ein ben lezeh ela mea ve'arba'im ama ve'echad v'shlish. But that may be so long as there isn't more than 141 and a third amos between the two outer ones. Asa emtsa'i et shloshtan v'yod echad. Thus, this makes, with the third one, makes all three of them considered to be a single unit, a single community. Now, Amar le Rabba la Abaye. So Rabba, however, now is going to challenge this kind of thinking to Abaye. Kam yahe ben chitzon la'emtsa'i. How much is the distance, he's asking him, between the outer ones and the middle? Amarle alpayim amah. He said to him, 2,000 amos, right? Or up to 2,000 amos. Vaha adhu da'amad. And so Rava now challenges Abaye and says, but aren't you the one? Adhu da'amad. Kivate de Rabba bare de Rabba bar Rav Huna. The one who was ready to agree with the view of Rabba bare de Rabba bar Huna. Okay? Mistabra, who was of the opinion, the Amar Yoter me alpayim Amar, that when we talked about a city shaped as a bow, and if the two ends of the bow were greater than, right, 4,000 Amar, I'm sorry, greater than 2,000 Amar, okay, from where do we measure the tchum? We don't measure it from the bowstring, we measure it from the inner part of the bow itself. Okay? The amar yoter me'alfei amar, hachi hashta. Here too, okay? Namely, making that comparison to the example of the middle village with the other villages. So now Abai is going to respond back to that and give an answer to Rava. That's not a valid comparison, says Abai. Why? Hatam, there, in regards to the bow-shaped city, Ikabatim, there are houses that go from one end of the bow all the way to the other. And so therefore it's possible to pretend that instead of being bow-shaped, it would be straight across. Okay? Horizontal. Hacha lekabatim. But in this case, okay, where you have two villages apart, okay, you don't have anything in between. No houses. So now Rabbah comes back. V'amar le Rabbah la'abaye. Kama yehe ben chitzon lechitzon. Sorry. And he challenges him and he says again, well, how far is it from the outer two villages? So Abai responds, Kama yehe, how far is it? Mai nafka lach mina, what difference does it make to you? He says, Kol she'ilu michnis emsa'i b'neihen, so long as it said that you're able to enter that third one between them, ve'ein bein zeh lezeh ela mea va'arba'in ve'achat v'shalish, and there's the difference between them, okay, in each case, is less than 141 and a third, right? So what difference does it make to you? Va'afilu arba alafim ama, even, says Rava, if it's 4,000 ama, amar le'in, he says to him, yes. Vaha amar Rav Huna, but wasn't it Rav Huna who said, Ir ha'asuya kekeshet, that if a town, a city, was structured in a bow shape, im yesh bein shtei rasheha, if between the two, I'll call it ends or heads of the bow, pachot me arba'at alafim ama, less than 4,000 amma, modedim la min hayheter, we are able to measure the tchum from what we'll call the bowstring, an imaginary line from the two, okay, pieces of the bow, the two ends of the bow. Min haheter. Ve'im lav, and if not, modedim la min hakeshet. If not, then we have to measure from the bow itself, from the middle of the bow. Amar lehatam, and by the way, look at the on 57b2, the diagram above note 12. You can see that's the example that the diagram we're using. Okay? Okay. Okay. Now, amar lehatam, lekala meimar mile. But there, you cannot say that you can fill in. Hacha ikala meimar mile. But here, with regards to in other words, there with the example of the villages, you're saying you can fill in. Okay, here can you fill in? Okay, is it possible to fill in? Amale Rav Safra le Rabba. So Rav Safra then says to Rabba, Hooray, I'll give you an example of a real situation. Namely the following. Excuse me. Rav Safra says to Rabba, Hooray, B'nai Akistaphon. Okay? There was a city called Akistaphon, okay, on one side of the Tigris River. Okay. Demashchinan laho tchuma mehai gisa the ardashai. And we measure its tchum from the opposite city, the city opposite it on the Tigris, as if they are one unit, okay, going beyond, okay, 2,000 amma. Uvenei tchuma the Ardashar, and for the people who live in Ardashar, mashchinan laho tchuma, we measure their tchum, mehai gisa the akistafon, from the other, I'll call it the far side of the city of Arkistafon, which is on the opposite side of the Tigris. Okay? But the Gemara says, Ha ika de diglat. But don't we have the Tigris River in between these two towns? The misfeka liyater mimea va'arba'im ve'achad v'shalish. That it's questionable, okay, isn't it more than 141 and a third? Okay, so what happened now? Rava took Rav Safra, okay, outside. Nafak, they went outside, okay, and he brought them to the walls of the city. Achve, and he pointed to him and he showed him, Achvele, Hinach Atmahata. There were ruins, sections of walls. The Shura, okay? The Mebale Bediglat, that were uncovered, I mean, they were covered up or under the water of the Tigris. And these, let's say, submerged walls went a certain distance, namely Beshivim Amma Veshirayim. And they went a distance of 72 thirds amos. Okay? So in other words, that being the case, okay, if we look at the diagram on 57B3, note 20, okay, opposite note 20, we can see there that the submerged walls of one city, okay, went out 70 2/3. Submerged walls of the other city went out 70 2/3. And therefore, the only real difference between those submerged walls was the 70 2/3. And since we said one karpaf could be between two cities, okay, and thus make it a single unit, that's why they were able to determine that those two cities could be, Rava could say that was the case, okay? And that's where that Gemara finishes, okay? We'll finish up just with a little bit of the new Mishnah. Okay, guys? Matnitin, says our Mishnah. Ein modedin ela bechevel shel chamishim amma, lo pachot velo yoter. We don't use as a measure, unless we have a rope that is 50 amma, no more and no less. Okay? Not only that, velo yimdod ela keneged libo, but the surveyors must hold the rope chest high, okay, when they use it to measure the distance. Haya moded v'higia lagai, if they were measuring and they came to a canyon or a dip, a valley, or legader, or they came to a fence, mavlio. Okay, what do? We consider that, right? We span it, right? v'chozer lemadato, and then they continue their measurement. Okay. In other words, so if you look at 57b4 on the left hand of the notes, you see a slight dip. You don't put the rope into the dip, okay, to measure it. You span it. You measure it straight across. That's what it's telling us. Okay? That's what it's saying. Ubilvad, okay? All right? All right? All right? Ubilvad, as we continue over a little bit, shalo yitzei chutz l'tchum. So long as they don't go outside the tchum with their measuring. Okay? And just to finish up the Mishnah, okay? Im eino yachol lahavlio bazo, okay? If they're unable to span it, Amar Rabbi Dustai, okay? Says Rabbi Dustai in such a case, in the name of Rabbi Meir, Shamati shemikadrin beharim. Then it's as if we consider that they pierce the mountain. And we'll go into that more tomorrow. All right, guys? Everybody take care. Stay well, especially Harvey. Okay?
Well, everyone stay safe.
And stay safe, everybody.
Good. Have a good night. Day.
Okay.